Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV. And today we're going to bring you the show that we were supposed to do yesterday. Uh, how Marxism got its start in New York City, and not in, in a book written by Karl Marx. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on. And boy, this is really amazing. Something I didn't know, but we were doing a program the other day on President John F. Kennedy. His talk to the journalists on April 27th, 1961, a very important speech when he talks about how America is opposed to secret societies. And then he makes this joke about Karl Marx, which is really revealing. What did he say about Marx?
Yeah. You may remember that in 1851, the New York Herald Tribune, under the sponsorship and publishing of Horace Greeley, employed as its London correspondent an obscure journalist by the name of Karl Marx. We are told that foreign correspondent Marx, stone broke and with a family ill and undernourished, constantly appealed to Greeley and managing editor Charles Dana for an increase in his munificent salary of $5 per installment, a salary which he and Ingalls ungratefully labeled as the lousiest petty bourgeoisie cheating. But when all of his financial appeals were refused, Marx looked around for other means of livelihood and fame, eventually terminating his relationship with the Tribune and devoting his talents full-time to the cause that would bequeath the world the seeds of Leninism, Stalinism, and revolution in the Cold War.
And it was quite a remarkable kind of joke. He was pointing out that journalists shouldn't be underpaid, and he's talking to journalists during his talk. But this is something I never knew about. The speeches of JFK weren't something taught in school in my day. It was too close to that time. I wasn't yet born when he gave that speech, but it was childhood he was well known. But so we looked into the facts and we found out it's not exactly as John F. K. explained it. So, who really hired Karl Marx? And
well, in our research, when we were looking at this, we saw how, his boss, Horace Greeley, was also a pusher of the socialist ideas and that compound form system of foyers. Then,
Dana is also associated with this, right?
Yeah, and he too was also a socialist and follower of the foyer, and I think most of their other European writers for the Tribune was also.
Yeah, so Dana started his career in journalism as an obscure editor of a paper, and then he gets hired to work at the Brooks Farm, and as a waiter, and because the Brooks Farm was like kind of like a house in the countryside that you'd stay in, and it's within the city of Boston today, but back then it was in the countryside. And Brooks Farm was what's this place called? It was a special type of commune.
Yeah, let me.
It failed as a guest house, and it became a commune under the direction of Dana. And you look for the exact kind of term. This commune was the modern Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Everyone had equal status, work in the place, and there was sex with everyone. There was no morals whatsoever. It was like an orgy house.
Phalanx.
Oh, phalanx. Oh, that's right. Foyer, phalanx. So you had like a 3-story building. On the top floor lived the wealthy, the middle floor, the middle class, and the lower floor, the lower class. But you were paid according to the work you did, not according to your social status. And if you didn't like the work you did, you got paid more than if you liked it. So it was like complete social experimentation. Well, thankfully, the building burnt down, but maybe it wasn't thankfully. So Dana had to find a real job. So he went and got hired by Horace Greeley and eventually became his managing editor. He's the one who hired Karl Marx, but he didn't hire an unknown writer. Dana was someone who traveled around Europe visiting all the socialists, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah. In 1848, Dana wrote from Europe letters to it and other papers on the revolutionary movements of that year. In Cologne, he visited in person Karl Marx and Ferdinand Freiligrath. From
So,
18, yeah,
continue.
and from 1852 to 1861, Marx was one of the main writers for the New York Daily Tribune.
So here they're repurposing the whole economic effort of the New York paper to fund Marxism. Marxism in Europe, you have to say Marxism is called Marx, because we're always told it was Engels, a factory owner in England. And the interesting thing is this Fourier's phalanx houses. Fourier was sponsored by what famous banker?
The Rothschilds.
Yeah, so here we have it. It's the Rothschilds. It's not Engels running it out of England. It's the Rothschilds out of France who was behind the whole socialist movement. And what is the socialist movement? The communist Marxist movement? Destroy Christendom, destroy Christian monarchy. Who would want to destroy Christendom and Christian monarchy? Well, who other than Jewish bankers?
Yeah.
So,
and to say he was some poor little writer, I mean, the guy wrote, what was it, 500, not, I don't know what they call them in the Tribune, but essays or things. So 500 of them. $5 a piece.
That is a very high salary. That's $2,500. You have to remember that in the 1850s, if you made £5 a year, you were considered middle class in England at £5 a year. Because back then, a penny was worth more like $10 today. So this guy was being paid $6,000. We would say that today he'd be paying $6,000 an article. That would be the equivalent of it. That's not small. That is financing international communism. And here we have it tied back to Horace Greeley, Daily Tribune. Do we have any context to show, any information to show that Tribune was sponsored by the New York Masonic banks?
Let me see what they have here.
I know Greeley is New England Puritan. I know that.
Yeah.
And he came to New York and
he left the Congregationalists to become a Unitarian.
Okay, so for people who don't know, the Unitarians broke off from the Congregationalists because they denied the Trinity, and the Unitarian movement was sponsored by Freemasonry because they wanted a religion without Christianity.
Yeah, and it was also and it was early on. It started becoming the publisher of the Whig Party, but it wasn't too radical for them. So when it came time, I think it was Greeley or one of his friends in politics formed the Radical Republican Party, which would then take on pacifism, feminism, socialist reforms. Radical wing of the Republican Party.
So he was trying to turn the Republican Party to the left.
Mm-hmm.
But he made his money and fame by starting printing all the news for the Republican Party. So
Mm-hmm.
he worked his way in there. So very interesting. So Marxism. When next time you hear that Marxism began in Europe, no, it began in New York City. That's where the money came from. And here is the explanation why in 1915 the New York banks are promoting Trotsky to send him to Russia and start a revolution, because that's already 60 years after the Tribune financed Marx. So it's the same downtown area of New York City behind the whole thing. And I bet if you looked into it, you'll find that the Tribune was financed by Masonic banks in New York. Well,
Yeah.
they were the most important papers. It must be.
Mm-hmm. Because all the prominent Whig and Republican, newly Republican Party was all in on it, and with Horace Greeley and also member of Congress at the time too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he ran for office for a time, Horace Greeley, and rather famous in the history of American journalism. Although he's considered dirty journalism in the sense he published articles that would smear people's reputations, but that was the journalism. The journalism's always been that way in a certain sense. But this is a very interesting thing. And Kennedy, why would Kennedy be making a joke about this when speaking to journalists in 1961? He's almost like he's saying, "Remember, you journalists started the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
You can't turn left," and it almost is like he's telling him, not be Marxist. But if you listen to the Kennedy's talk on the live replay, it's recorded. You can find it on YouTube. The journalists find it funny that Marx was a journalist. They like it. Even in the 60s, you could hear that they're really left wing back then.
Yeah. So when Karl Marx leaves the New York Tribune, um, he has all that money from 500 articles, and he decides to write a little book, which changes the course of history.
Well, at least is used as an excuse to change the course of history. And that book, what's that title of that book?
De Capital.
Yeah, Die Kapital, or Das Kapital, as we call it today. So it's a book on the whole thing about class warfare and take down the ruling class, establish a proletariat.
Mm-hmm.
Dictatorship of the proletariat, where the people are supposed to rule over everyone and everyone shares equal property and stuff like that. It becomes a big narrative tool for the Masonic banks. This is what they're going to push in Russia, China, Germany, throughout Europe, all throughout Latin America, because it destroys monarchies. Mm-hmm. Where was the Marxism incarnated? Russia destroyed the Romanov monarchy, Christian monarchy. It was imported to China to bring down, to prevent the imperial dynasty, the imperial monarchy from returning. It had already fallen. Cambodia, they had a monarchy in Cambodia. I'm trying to think other countries where communism, they tried to install it in Spain and get rid of the king. They tried.
Did Vietnam have a monarchy?
I don't think Vietnam had a monarchy. No, it didn't have a monarchy, but there was a Catholic government in southern Vietnam. That's why it was being attacked primarily. Mm-hmm. So very interesting, though, that all roads lead back to New York City when it comes to these things of history. And you can learn a lot listening to these speeches of famous presidents that have been recorded. Things that are in there that they didn't put in your school textbooks.
Mm-hmm. So, trivia time, folks. Do you know the one Pace Plaza in Lower Manhattan? That building?
At One Place Plaza?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, well, no, what is that One Place Plaza? I don't remember. I don't know New York.
The New York Tribune building.
At One Place Plaza. Now, where is that in regard to 120 Broadway?
That is a good question. It is one place. Yeah, let's see here. Hold on, folks. Doing a little search.
The reason why I asked for 120 Broadway because that's where the Brown Brothers Harriman Bank is.
Okay.
You could almost do a tour of southern Manhattan and talk about world history, the movers and shakers. This is why we find that under Roosevelt, the vice president of the Federal Reserve Bank in Manhattan, which is diagonally across the street from Brown Brothers Harriman Bank, is openly saying that he's a Bolshevik.
Mm-hmm. It is 0.6 miles away.
Okay. What, north, south, east, or west?
Mm-hmm. Makes a crooked S.
Okay. So it's close by. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Karl Marx.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for AJ for having me on this brief little tour through history. And I want to point out when you run into any history fact, trace the people involved. Everything that we've uncovered about how the Masonic banks have been running history for the last 120 years is because we merely just trace the people. Who knew who? Where did they study? Who they met? Who were their friends?
Mm-hmm.
And you can connect everything together and find out what's really going on.
So might be back later today for our other episode on drugs in Arkansas.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story. Now I know why Clinton was chosen to be president. Perhaps you don't know.
Mm-hmm. So stay tuned for that, folks. This is Order Militaris Radio TV signing off. Day is full.
There's a little